This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Andrea Torrey Balsara, and we're going to talk to you about your work as a artist and writer. So one of the things we like to do on this show is just have a live in the moment interview, and I hope that you'll enjoy that. So, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's fun to talk to people from around the world. This is actually episode like 1234. And so, yeah, we've been around for a while. We've got your website, torreybalsara, .com, and that'll be
That's
fully
right.
clickable for anybody that wants to check that out. And once we get into the interview, we like to tell your story, but a couple of things we always ask anybody on the show is like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, I've heard you ask that to other guests, and you'd think that would be an easy thing to answer, but I was like, what? You know, it's like where do I start? But basically, I do what I do because I feel like I don't know. It's like breathing to me. It's like it is who I am. So I unless I was somebody else, I have to do this.
Hmm.
But I think also the other part of it is that, part of what I am doing is I'm trying to help people who are going through things that I went through as a young person. And I was helped so much by people I might not have even known very well, or just a word of kindness or a smile or advice, and it got me through. And so I really feel like we're all part of this circle, and we're supposed to help each other. And so the things that I've learned, I like to try to help those who are still maybe struggling through those things.
Well, I think it's good to pay it forward, because
Yeah,
being a mentor, the kind of mentor, being just an advocate for life. So many
absolutely.
people are like haters today. They just like to just be difficult to be difficult.
Well, it's easier, isn't it? It's easy to be angry and blame everybody.
Yeah,
But when you realize that all the blaming doesn't change your life, you're not any happier. In fact, you're miserable and you've driven everybody that you love away, then you have to say, okay, blaming isn't the answer. What is the answer? You have to look within. And if you've got crud that you have to deal with, if you've got issues with your personality or even your mental health, or you know it's up to us to take responsibility of who we are, and do the very best we can and not blame other people.
yeah. I'm always a big fan of the Victorian poets that had this idea of the looking glass self, and I think that like if you're an artist or if you're a creative type of person, you tend to kind of go into that. You tend
Yeah,
to go into your vulnerabilities.
yeah,
You turn it into art. You
exactly.
have a conversation with yourself and the world, and you're willing to put it out there. And
Yeah, absolutely.
and so you have like the hero's journey in art and life we're kind of talking about, but reframing um story in terms of the hero's journey. Like maybe you can talk about what that concept means to you.
Well, I'd always been drawn to books with quests, with like Frodo in Lord of the Rings. I was just like, oh, Frodo, he's tiny. Everybody discounts him because he's just a little hobbit, and yet he saves Middle Earth.
It's the
It's like,
world, yeah.
so I was like, oh, I want to be like Frodo. Um, and then there was the book Watership Down, where it's
I love
about,
that.
I love that book, and it's actually part of the inspiration for my young adult book, The Great and the Small, because
That's awesome.
uh, it takes place with a colony of rats, as well as the human protagonists. There's also this colony of rats, and so I was inspired by the book Watership Down, and it's every man hero, Hazel the rabbit,
Yeah.
who leads his warren from certain doom to safety and a happy future. And so um, You know, I was already drawn to those books, but all growing up, I didn't know it, but I had buried trauma. I mean, I didn't know it because it was buried. It was
Mhm.
buried so deeply that um, all my acting out, the depression, the incredible mood swings, the terror that I would feel, all of this, what I thought of as crazy behavior, pushing people away. It was all because of this trauma that I had deep inside. But even though it was deep inside, I had this, and I had suicide ideation. I mean, it was really hard sometimes just to put one step after the other. But I just felt like there was something more, that life wasn't just about suffering. It wasn't just about feeling crazy and feeling alone and isolated and unlovable. There was something in me that knew there was more. And I think that that's why I was drawn to the hero's journey. And eventually I got to the place, and it took so many years, you know, counseling. I had to be on medication for a while. And now I'm doing energy medicine every day. And I keep myself healthy now, and I have inner peace now. But boy, was that hard earned, you know. But finally, I got to a place where I started to recognize that all of the things that I thought were so horrible, this event that had happened to me that had caused me to, be so traumatized, and later traumas and all these things, and I had thought, oh, poor me, how could this happen to me? And later I realized that there's this secret to suffering. And I've got this saying on my wall. It's from Rumi, the a Persian poet from, like, I think the 1300s. It says, "There is a secret medicine given only to those who hurt so hard they cannot hope."
Mhm.
And what I have recognized, and the hero's journey falls right into that, is that when you go through trials, it's not just about the trial. You walk through it. You're walking in the fire. You feel like you're going to die, but you keep walking, and finally you come out the other side. And there are gifts of the spirit that can only be revealed through fire. It's like the jack pines, and I love jack pines for this reason. Their pine cones only open in the fire.
In the fire, yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
They're
what an
built for it.
analogy for life.
Yeah, well, sometimes you have to go through,
Yeah,
life itself, the trauma. Is like,
yeah,
you're a captain on the ocean. It's like you gotta go through the storm,
absolutely. And you've got
and
to
you don't
learn
want a
how to
captain that
drive your boat.
never went through a storm, because how are they gonna handle it when it happens?
That's right.
Like a commander that's never been in a battle is like you want somebody battle tested.
That's
Um,
right.
and it's hard because, everybody wants, like, the ideal situation. They want things to be perfect. We're living in an age where everybody's trying to be perfect. You go on social media, everybody's trying to kind of frame and
Yeah,
reframe their image to
yeah,
be like the best. And my whole point, like, I'm a child of the 70s, and I loved, I've read Charlotte's Web, I read
yeah.
the same books that you're talking about, and Tolkien, I was all into that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the idea was like that we could dive into something and actually, stick with it. But people's attention span so short. I don't know if they actually get things. It's like listening skills, retention. Like we're being scattered with so much noise that I
Agreed.
don't know if people actually even hear themselves.
Well, I think that, one thing that gives me hope, social media's come on the scene, the internet's come on the scene, and everything's gone crazy. And from our perspective, it's like, oh, this is, it's kind of gone crazy. It's gone sideways. But I was hearing someone on that was a history expert on communications. And they were saying that when the printing press came out,
Oh,
There
my
was this huge, all
uproar is too
these
much.
pamphlets and, books, and everybody went crazy. And then when the telephone came on, everything went crazy. And he said, but, after the initial, like, blah, everything kind of like,
The
okay.
overload dies down. Well,
Yeah,
people
yeah,
start to discern that do you actually need to pay attention to everything,
right.
or do you start to, like, pick the things that you're interested in? And I think right now is there's so much overload because of our
Yeah.
phones.
Oh,
Because
it's
like,
terrible.
we used to be able to just the phone was just hanging on the kitchen wall.
It was a phone, you were on it sometimes, but most of the time you weren't.
Yeah, and now it's like you gotta take all the messages, all the calls,
Yeah,
all the notifications, and you have to kinda give yourself time to disconnect,
yeah,
to focus, and I think, in order to, focus, you have to be willing, like you said, to kinda deal with your trauma,
yeah,
and a lot of people push it down because 'cause we're told to, like, suck it up
right.
or they don't, move on.
It doesn't work.
You have to kind of process things as an artist. It's like you
Yeah,
take the moments and you turn it into art and you get through it to the
yeah,
other side. And like
right.
and once you go to the other side, like if you're an artist, if you actually taken that moment and turned it into like a piece of work
And
that the
that's where a
world.
lot of great art comes from.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a book on of Vincent van Gogh's his art, but also letters that he wrote to his brother Theo, who was his art patron,
Mhm.
because Vincent van Gogh couldn't sell any art while he was alive.
Yeah. It's
And
like
at one point,
life.
he had a bill to pay, and so he took a wheelbarrow of his paintings over and said, "Would you take this for payment?" And the wife of the man that Vincent owed the money to, she looks at his painting, said, we don't want that garbage. Take that, but we'll take the wheelbarrow."
Wrong decision.
So it's like, but he kept, he inspires me so much. I call him the patron saint of artists
Yeah.
because he created for love. He created because it was in him to do.
Do it. Yeah. But that's why I
And
think it's important to have that because William Blake is like I always kind of refer to his stuff too because the songs of innocence and experience are all on these metal plates with etchings,
yeah,
and they were found like in a barn. He was at the kind of same situation in his time. He wasn't known as one of the greatest romantic poets. Who was like found after his time.
and
Like
same with Emily Dickinson. I believe her stuff was found under her bed or, in a
yeah.
shoebox or
But some people he had to drive to etch those poems into metal. Like maybe I'm not popular now, but these are eternal. Like, the idea that he's gotta put it down is, like, more than paper, and so it kinda always inspired me, like, to
Yeah,
look at artists that maybe aren't, like, in their moment, like Lou Reed in the Velvet Underground,
yeah,
that they weren't really known in '66,
yeah,
but by '74, '75, everybody kinda understood his style because Bowie picked it up and said, "Hey, this guy's inspires me." So, yeah, sometimes you get, other artists or people come along and they recognize that this is actually important, even though it didn't sell. And
right.
sometimes the monetary aspects and the popularity, I think people get lost today in the algorithms. Is like,
I
oh,
know.
if I don't get a million views, that's not worth anything. Is that true?
Absolutely not. And I think it goes back to, again, it goes back to this idea of the hero's journey. Like, why are we here? And I would argue, and I think many people would argue, that we're here for soul school. We're not here to sell books. We're not here to be popular. We're not here to get 3 million views on Instagram. Who cares? At the end of the day, when I'm lying on my deathbed or 500 years from now when all of our dust will look the same, nobody's going to care, how many likes they had.
Yeah,
It's just not going to matter. And I think the other part of that is we're talking about people who were discovered later. Vincent van Gogh was discovered later. Emily Dickinson was. But so many people are never
yeah,
discovered.
Yeah, never
And
finding.
they are the true heroes, like the people who maybe they don't even have time to create. Maybe they don't have time to paint, or they're living, um, I watched a documentary about people who are living next to train tracks in India, whole tent cities. Those people don't have access to paint or a laptop to write a book. And yet they continue with courage, with the best they can to raise children in safety, you know with whatever means they have. And I to me, the people who are the unsung heroes, they are the people who are the backbone of this world, not the people who are famous and having their photos taken. I'm as susceptible as anybody to the looking at celebrity stuff, and I
Mhm.
have to remind myself, turn off my phone, turn off the celebrity news. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is, at the end of the day, love,
Yeah,
courage,
the
you know?
grace of humanity itself, because I think a lot of times we've been put into this idea that some people are worth more than
Yeah.
others because of, popularity
And they're
and
not.
their status, and then that they wanna reframe things as, like, who's worth this, who's
Yeah,
worth that, and my whole I'm in tech, and sometimes tech people are guilty of, like, you create a tool and you don't consider the morality of the tool you create.
right.
You create a process and you don't think about the consequences. This goes back to, like, the creation of the atomic bomb.
Yes.
After if you've seen the movie, like, they look at it and say, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that."
Yeah.
But, like, you
One
get caught
thing.
up in it, and you
Yeah.
think, like, that the people are gonna use it for a good purpose, and they don't always do that, so you have to kinda have a more holistic view, and not be so narrow. Not
Yeah,
that you don't create things, but you have to have a consideration, of, like, a holistic view, and some people are such in so much in a narrow lanes, and they define, people by very simple terms, and I think people are very multifaceted,
I do
and
too. Yeah.
it's not I don't think it's like, if you think of you like, we're all humans on this planet. Doesn't any human have a right to be on the planet? So when you start
And
talking about people being legal or illegal or not worth
yeah,
this, we're not worth that, it's like, what are you talking about?
I know. And doesn't every single human being have the right to be educated, the right to eat, the right to have shelter,
Yeah,
the right to be safe? And you're right. Like, there's a built-in hierarchy, and if we don't challenge that in our own minds, in our own actions, then it will continue.
yeah, you think you have to have empathy, because the problem is, like,
Absolutely.
we kinda live in an age where empathy is thought as weak, right?
Well,
I'm
I
like,
think
"What is
I
that?"
I think there are a lot of people who believe it's weak, and I think that I would go back to, the U.S. considers itself a multi cultural nation, but also a Christian nation mostly. Like,
Mhm,
that's kind of.
mindset.
And I'm a Baha'i. I used to be a Christian, and now I kind of consider myself a Christian Baha'i. But I would go back to, the example of Christ, where
Yeah,
he
his
says,
teachings.
the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And, when Peter takes out his sword and cuts off the ear of the soldiers that were coming to take Christ, Christ said, no, those who live by the sword shall die by the
The
sword. And
sword,
so this militaristic joining of God and guns, and
yeah.
it is not it's not based on any religion that has any validity.
Yeah, it seems like
No.
it's been hijacked by,
Yeah,
oligarchs.
by extremists.
They it's hijacked by people who have, power dynamics.
Yeah,
So you think
and
about, like, balance of power games and people playing, it's always been there. Like, this idea, that Calvinism, as I've always kind of dived in, I was a political science major, but in sociology too, the idea is like you are closer to God if you're rich,
Right.
right?
Right.
So if
As
you're
you
an
book the
oligarch or a
stairway to
robber,
heaven.
yeah, if you're a robber baron, like
Yeah.
you are closer, even though you have child labor in your factory, even though
Yeah.
you don't take care of people if they get injured. That
Yeah,
somehow because you have money,
but I
you're
think
better.
you would ask Christ, like, if you could ask Jesus, "Well, what do you think about that?" And he would say, I mean, we all know the answer. He said it.
He wouldn't be saying that that's the way, and
No,
it's like he wasn't about all the ornaments and all the
no.
bureaucracy of a church building.
Yeah, no, none of
He
that.
wasn't
None
about
of
that
that.
at all. Yeah, about the artifice of it. It's like, what
Yeah.
is that? And
That's
everybody that
all
you kinda
that's human stuff put on
on
afterward
top of
to
it.
exploit something that was pure.
Yeah, and I think people get, the critical thinking gets lost because people don't pay attention or even think to, like, why? Like,
Yeah,
why is that? Like, what is going on?
yeah,
Read history. Like, you see a lot of things, patterns happening again because people
yep,
don't learn their history. They don't learn the dynamics, and then they just look at some influencer, some podcaster, some famous person says X, and then that's true. It's like, why is that true? And
yeah,
I think a lot of people challenge, the artists tend to challenge, like on the bell curve, we're on the outer edges.
yeah,
We tend to, like, have a lot of neurodiversity, kind of being not be willing to just go along. We kind
no.
of put it out there,
It
and
would be
you
easier
get
if we
dinged
could
for it.
go along, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, it's
It'd be
easier to
easier,
just
but
say, like, yeah, I mean, it's like to go and just clone
yeah,
what's been done before, be like a Jimi Hendrix or Miles Davis or
yeah,
Janis Joplin. Some like you go and you push it, an immediate reaction usually is they hate it,
yeah,
you know, and then suddenly you become the canon and everybody copies you until
right,
somebody else comes and breaks the canon again. And I've always been, it's like, I love to look at what's going on in the underground, because
yeah,
that's where everything's happening. Like in the canon, like, well, I know it's there. I got to read Shakespeare. I got to study Beethoven. I got to study Davis. I have to get my 10,000 hours as an artist to get my skill set. But
mhm,
then you go and you break the rules. Anybody goes to Berkeley knows, it's like after you get out, you break it. Like you learn the theory and then you break it.
yeah.
That's the point.
Well, it's, art is, for me, art is about expressing, like, trying to, for me, it is like breathing. I've just always felt like an artist. I
Just do
didn't
it.
know I was a writer until, in my 20s, but I'd always wanted to be an illustrator and had always dreamed of that. Um,
So did you do the art before the writing?
yeah,
Were you
I
more of
did.
an illustrator before you wrote, and then maybe the stories came from the art? Like you
Yeah,
had the story to
you
go
know,
with the art?
it was interesting because each developed very separately. So I had wanted to be an illustrator, but because of, and when I was little, my folks, we lived in this army. What do they call it? Uh, it's not a BOQ. It was, basically army housing. We lived in
Oh, yeah.
Germany, for the armed forces, and so we had this little tiny dining room, and my parents were both taking oil painting classes, and they had to keep their easels in the dining room with their works in progress. And when they weren't around, I would go and, like, dab my brush in the paint and be, helping them. They never caught me. But I really, and then when they would go for art supplies, they would take me along and they would let me choose one art supply. And so I remember very clearly, like, walking through these like shelves of, it was a
Art.
beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful art store, and just being like, what am I going to get?
Yeah.
I'm feeling really official. But then when 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 I started going through puberty, my world just went pew, because the trauma I had gone through was I had been molested at 5 and
Mm,
had just like buried the
mm,
memory because the person had told me it was my fault and I believed him. And so I was like, no one can ever know what I've done, ever, ever. And it came out through nightmares and lots of different ways. But like, I was like, when I was okay as a kid, and then as soon as puberty stuck, it was like a bomb went off.
mm.
And suddenly art was no longer like I felt like a head with just kind of a sock attached to my neck. My body was not connected to me. I was so disassociative.
Mm.
And so when I would try to draw, it'd be like I'd be staring at my hand from like outer space, and there's this hand that,
Disconnected. Wow. Yeah.
and they felt like they were made of concrete. And I would draw and I would look at what I'd drawn and I'd be like, oh, this is garbage, and sometimes I'd like mark through it or rip it up or, put it aside. And later I looked at some of these paintings and I was like, they were good. Like what what
Yeah.
was the
Sometimes
problem?
we're a bad judge of our work, like
Yeah. And I just was so disconnected that I felt like art would never come back to me. It just felt like so beyond, and it was heartbreaking. Like it was heartbreaking. Finally, my sister Michelle Torrey is an author, and she wrote a picture book manuscript, and I just thought, let me illustrate it. Neither of us knew at the time that you don't turn in a manuscript with illustrations unless you're the author illustrator. But we were happy and ignorant. So I was like, yeah, let me in. So I illustrated it and it kind of got my hand, reconnecting a little bit again.
mhm.
The manuscript didn't go anywhere, but I was like, Michelle, write another story so we can try again. And then one day I wrote her an email, and it was really funny. I was describing, something that had happened with my dog, and she wrote back and she said, you should learn how to write yourself because it's funny, just learn how to write. And so I did. I took courses through the Institute of Children's Literature because I didn't know the first thing about writing a story. Not one little thing. I'd never thought of myself as a writer. And slowly it started to come together. And then I wrote a few stories, and this educational publisher picked them up, but they already had their illustrators.
Oh,
So
wow.
suddenly now I was an
Writing with
author and I couldn't sell my illustrations. So I was
relationship.
like, you know,
That's how
um,
it works sometimes. Like if you're a songwriter, like you wanna sing the song, but sometimes like somebody else, they said, "Well, no, the song's good, but you shouldn't sing it."
I know, it was like I felt like, this is really weird, like, my identity kept, writer, artist, who am I? But then and I could not get anybody to publish my illustrations, so I had my own website, and I thought, "I'm gonna put my illustrations on there, and nobody can stop me. It's my website." So I
Yeah.
did, and then someone contacted me to do, uh, let's see, to illustrate their books. So not as an author anymore, but just as an illustrator. So I'd like come full circle
Circle
again.
to go doing that, yeah. You never know, like, people, they see that your different skill sets and they apply them to their, the situation. It's like, "Oh," I've always been this big believer is like the singer-songwriter,
Yeah,
like the artist, writer, illustrator. 'Cause then you have a vision and it's
yeah,
coherent, and sometimes you have, like, in the comic book industry, you have a Stan Lee, you have a Stick Dick Steve Ditko, you have Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, right? And when Kirby tried to write himself, people would say, "Well, it doesn't feel like what happened when you wrote Spider-Man. Feels
yeah,
like something else." But, yeah, I always still liked Kirby's vision. When
yeah,
Kirby wrote his own work and drew it, there was something about it that was like, wow, I like that cohesive, knowing that that's his vision, right? That it's
Yeah,
not
like
Stan Lee's words, that's actually Kirby's words to go with his art. And I'm like, yeah, I like that.
I mean, with these books, like I sometimes I wish I did one thing because it would be easier to move projects forward. But I write
You
for
bounce around.
YA and illustrated it, and then I wrote for these children's books and illustrated them. So every single project I do takes forever because I'm doing everything. I'm like,
It's all a lot of
chief
work.
cook and bottle washer, uh, and sometimes I look with a little bit of envy, if I'm being honest, at people who they're illustrators and they're brilliant illustrators and they've illustrated 50 million books, and I'm like on book 5 or something.
Well, volume isn't important. To
I
me,
know.
it's the cohesive vision.
Yeah,
I like being able to see like
yeah,
somebody's complete thought. Um,
yeah.
and that to me has always been why I was always drawn to like, not just in music they have the singer. You have the age of the singers like in the 50s and the 40s, and they
Mhm.
didn't write their work. Other
Right.
people wrote it. And then you get like Dylan, and
Yeah,
you get the age of the songwriters and the Beatles, and this idea is like the guys in the band can actually write their own song. They don't have to go to Tin Pan Alley and get a writer.
yeah,
And there's something about that to me. And we've kind of
yeah,
gone full circle now. Well, now in the industry, there's a lot of people who are actually writers and they're singers again.
yeah,
They
yeah.
actually don't write. And I'm like, I kind of still like the 50s, the 60s, like the Dylan kind of mindset.
Well, I think for me, I mean, I am envious, but in another way, I know myself, and I know that if there's any stone unturned, I'm going to be there like, okay, well, how do I write a young adult novel? How do you illustrate that? How do so I wouldn't be satisfied with just doing the
One
visuals.
piece of
I
it. Yeah.
want to dig into the
Or
story.
control of, yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
not just control, but it's like, yeah, if you have a vision, like some people maybe
self-expression.
they
Yeah,
don't have the vision and maybe they just want to do the art, but they don't really want to control the story
yeah,
versus somebody is like, I actually have a complete thought.
yeah,
This is the world, this is the character, this is the dialogue, this is the scene they're in, and they want to actually, like if you get a writer director,
yeah,
right, and then they have a vision for their piece. You get a Orson Welles, right?
yeah,
You get Citizen Kane.
yeah.
Because you get this, it's like I didn't. He's in these interviews, and he's like, I didn't know what you couldn't do with the camera. And people are saying, well, how did you get these scenes? Like, well, I didn't know you couldn't do that.
Because he didn't know. That's
And
the thing. Like when I did The Great and the Small, I was like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool to do a story about, you know, a colony of sentient rats who have organized and are waging war against humanity using the bubonic plague, and I was like, that would be so cool. And then after I wrote it, I heard, oh, in YA they don't usually have animal characters, and I was like, but
why not? Why not?
but
I
then I
grew up
was
with
like,
Charlotte's Web, and like I
why
like,
not? Like, why not? And then I had also illustrated, and they were like, oh, YA they don't usually have illustrations, but I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's a book that I needed to write and illustrate. And if it connects with other people, all the better.
well, I've
But
always been big advocate of like, why not do what has been
exactly,
done? Because like
exactly.
if you just continue to do what's been done, it's boring to me.
It is boring. It is
And
boring.
then when you merge, when you take something, well, that isn't typically done. It's like, well, that's what I want. That's what I'm interested in. You
And
know,
and it was like, why wouldn't a young adult like an illustration? I
yeah,
loved it. Like I read Dickens and back in the day, and they always had these neat little illustrations,
yeah.
or I read
You
Little
see it.
Women and they had
There's
illustrations.
pictures.
And it's
Like
like,
it's like it doesn't make sense to me when people say that
I know.
because like well, I lived in Japan, right? for a couple of years, and adults read manga, right?
Yeah.
And in anime is like it's not just for kids. It's actually and people get confused because why is it so adult? Because adults actually watch it and
Yeah.
read it. And so it's not. It's like they don't consider it to be like that's kid stuff. It's like it's just the idea that the art is part of
Yeah.
it's just part of it. And I've always been drawn to art
Yeah.
in any kind of form, from film to comic books to going to galleries. My daughter's a graphic artist. And it's just to me, it's like art is like it comes out of you. Like
Yeah.
I didn't go and tell my daughter, "Go get a real job."
No.
I like that she's an art director and she does a lot of cool work for people with disabilities. And it's to me, it's like there are people that are around me. I was like, "Well, is she gonna get a real job?" It's like, "What are you talking about?" It's
Yeah.
like that's her vision. That's what she wants to do.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not gonna poo-poo that. Like why I get frustrated when people look at art and they act like art to me is one of the foundations of humanity.
Yeah.
Like, it's not fun to get up if there's no art.
I know. I know. It's like it's it's a means to see into the soul of another human being. Like if it's truly art that pours from someone, it is a way of looking inside of another human being and feeling that connection.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I mean, I was talking to some tech bro, and I hate to just kind of be derogatory, call him a tech bro, but they were telling me that like, well, their AI was going to replace artists, actors,
Yeah.
musicians, and I'm like, okay, I understand why you say this because you're going to get the money.
Right.
Right. So, but you
Yeah.
like once like you're so narrow in your thinking, and art has been there from the beginning,
Yeah.
from like writing on the walls in a cave to like what's going on in Eritrea or Africa. You
Yeah.
see art
Yeah.
everywhere. It's everywhere. It's like it is who we are, and to say that you're gonna have only the machines do it
That
is
it's missing the
antithetical
point
to
of
humanity.
humanity. Yeah. It's what people, I mean, some of what happens right now will be replaced by computers. But the art that comes from someone, from an individual, from straight deep within them, I'm sorry, there is a resonance, there is a vibration to that kind of art that no computer will ever be able to create. It can mimic it,
Mhm.
and if you aren't really tuned in, you'll be like, "Oh,
Yeah,
that's good
it
enough."
looks passable because it's like it's
Yeah,
not just a stick drawing,
right.
it's art, but it's like it's basically like you train a computer on what has been done,
Yeah,
and then they might try to amalgamate it and throw things together, but it's still just a collection. Now, when a human being is the sum of everything they've ever experienced, so everything they've read. If I'm
yeah,
a musician, right, and I listen to like the blues, the
mhm,
pentatonic scale, like I'm gonna be within the pentatonic scale, and I'm gonna do like something about the crossroads, right?
mhm,
How I interpret that is different than what Led Belly or BB King or Stevie Ray Vaughan or Hendrix. It's gonna be my own interpretation, and this is what they kinda miss.
yeah,
The human being takes their own personal experience, which is not like anybody else,
that's right.
and then they put it on that. So, like, that is what that voice is, and I was talking to somebody who said, "Well, there's a democratization in music, and now anybody that's not even trained can do it." And as that's understood, yeah, you could do it, but there's something about somebody who's done the 10,000 hours
Yeah,
that they're gonna craft it like I know somebody else could create something, but is it gonna be at the level of Orson Welles?
right.
Probably
Yeah,
not. But it doesn't mean that it's not good, but there's something about being a master of your craft that I think people
yeah.
should be able to appreciate. Do you want somebody that's not an architect to build your house?
No,
So I don't think so. So it's like the minimization of art is like, well, it's democratization of art. It's like, well, do you really want somebody democratization of being a lawyer to defend you in a criminal case?
yeah,
Because they went on the net and they figured out that they know how to be like Columbo or something. They go, I'm going to defend you. It's like I don't know. I think I want somebody that actually knows what they're doing.
yeah, I think that what is possibly going to happen is that because easy art will be so easy to get, or easy writing, you just plug it into Chat GPT and it pops out a book. It will make the things that are created from that integrity, that soul of a human being, mean that much more.
Yeah.
It will shine versus this other stuff, which is a reflection. That's all it is. It's a reflection of, as you said, what has already been done. And sometimes that's good enough,
Yeah. It's
Um,
a reason like you go to a food truck instead of going to a junk fast food place, right?
yeah,
You go to like you go to a local donut shop that makes their own donut, like,
yeah.
because the way
Oh,
that guy makes with the way they make the donuts is not
yeah,
like anybody else. It's not like the chain. Now,
exactly.
if you're quick, you might go run and just get the one from the chain, but when you're really looking for something different, you
You
go
go for the donut. That
go to go for that
I
donut,
know.
it's like, it's like I'm living in New Hampshire, we have places where I'll drive 30 miles to get a donut because there's this shop that
Yeah.
makes them like and there's a bunch of other shops and nobody makes it like that shop. And that's why I think sometimes these tech bros don't get is they don't seem to understand the individuality of human experience and the value of it.
I think we will. I think right now we're still in that shake-up stage where we've got all of this new technology and everything is overwhelming. But eventually, I think that we will come to recognize that there is something uniquely human that cannot be reproduced by any computer anywhere. And and I think that day is coming. I just don't think it's today.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah, I
think
think
that
we're overwhelmed. I
yeah,
think we're in this kind of wild west.
I think so too.
And it's like in the music industry, like there was a point where people did sampling, right? And
Yeah,
people created a tool and you could do it. But then what happened is people started to have getting in trouble legally because like you didn't clear it.
right.
So now there's a whole mechanism as an artist. Is I can't just put out a sample. If I don't clear it, I'm gonna get dinged and it might get takedown.
Yeah,
So I think the thing with AI, my daughter is an artist, and she pointed out was like it's getting trained on people's art, and sometimes you can even see the signatures in some of the stuff it's actually pushing up and saying it created.
jeez.
So it's actually using
Right.
people's arts and not crediting it. So I mean, I think that's the shakeout that
Yeah,
artists to me need to be respected. And
yeah,
just because you create a tool doesn't mean that it's morally correct
right.
or legally correct. And I think that's where we're getting into, people are making ethical. There's a whole thing when I was trained on some AI and they had a course about ethics. And I'm like, okay, that's nice that you have this course, but the person teaching the course was like an AI person. I said, I think you need somebody outside of AI to be teaching ethics. I think you need like an ethical,
Yeah,
like somebody with a PhD in ethics, or
yeah,
to actually be the one teaching that course. Because to
yeah.
have somebody that's like too narrow teaching the course is like, I don't know if you're actually doing it right.
Too close to it and
Yeah,
too much of a vested interest,
yeah,
perhaps?
yeah. Because I just think
Yeah,
there needs to be an understanding of the value
yeah.
of our voice.
I think so too.
Because I kind of get, I grew up in the '70s. It was all about giving people voices. You get the singer songwriters, a lot of the female singer songwriters, and in my show, I've actually interviewed a lot of independent female singer songwriters over the years because I thought they weren't being paid attention to,
Right.
and I really think that having voice everybody's voice, be heard is important, and to actually go into the depth of everybody's point of view. And sometimes, within a canon, there's a certain point of view. It's like a Shakespearean point of view, or this point of view. It's like, well, where are the other voices? I want to hear the other voices too.
I know. I know. And it is really, you know, w- we're kind of, it's like the best of times and the worst of times, all at the same time. You know, even though there are voices that aren't being heard, there are voices now being heard that weren't ever heard before. So I think that eventually, you know, as the chaos of the current time reveals its shortcomings and reveals how treating some people like they don't matter, treating some people like they're disposable, that it's not a workable model for a
Sustainable.
functional humanity.
Yeah, you have to have a
Okay.
sustainable society.
It's not sustainable, and we all live on one very small shrinking planet, and we have to get along, all of
Mhm.
us, or we die together or we live together. And I am an optimist. I believe that we will find our way through, but it will be when we start respecting not only ourselves but other people, and
Yeah,
respecting their contributions, their
yeah.
right to
Well, just
live.
like, you think about it, it's like in terms of art, like, you have some people have, very kind of top-down, maybe male-centric concept, of what the canon is,
Yeah,
and then you've got, multiculturalism. Like, I wanna see an Eastern perspective, I wanna see some African perspective, I wanna see
exactly.
different, maybe it's not just Christian based. I'm gonna look at, like, Hindu, I'm gonna look at Muslim, I'm gonna look at indigenous, and
Yes,
if, as an artist, it's like a lot of times you say, I wanna go into, like, world rhythms. I
yes,
don't wanna just focus on just North America. It's like,
yeah.
I would go somewhere in Central America and pick up somebody's using some handmade instrument from an indigenous group, and we're like, "Why not? Why
It's
not
so
actually
it's
dive
so
into it?"
interesting, right?
Yeah,
It
and
is
it's
so interesting.
yeah, as a
It just
writer, it's
makes
like you
life
want
so much more interesting. One of the teachings of the Baha'i faith that I just love is that people are like flowers in a garden, and you would never plant, all white daisies and say, "Hey, I've got a great garden."
yeah,
No, you have your tall flowers, you have your small little ground covers, you have your purples, your yellows, your oranges, your reds, your roses,
yeah, the
and
forest is
then
very diverse.
huh?
You if you think
Yeah,
about, like, if you go in the forest, it might look like it's homogeneous, but when you actually start looking at it,
not.
it's not.
It's not. And that's also with people, that we don't have to all be the same to get along. It's actually the diversity of our experiences that create this strength. We need each other, because I only have my experience, how I see the world, but you have your way of seeing the world. And together we have a clearer view. And
Yeah,
that's
I mean, it's just like in tech, is like we learn from the world. Like, we
yeah,
don't if something's coming out of China, we don't not look at it, right?
yeah,
If
I know.
something came out of Africa, we don't not look at it. But this idea, like, I can only look at something if it only comes from here.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like,
that's
really? It's like,
yeah,
how is that
that's
gonna
like
work? Because this happened in tech where we were on AI was like, we're in the top, and then suddenly China came out with an algorithm that's better than ours.
yeah,
So now some people was like, "Oh, let's protect ourselves and not." So now you want protectionism?
yeah,
It's like, so if a better mathematical idea comes out of here, you want to suppress it because it didn't come from here. It's like,
yeah,
really?
I mean, that's kind of the worst aspects of human nature. We have great aspects, and we have aspects that are like, "Oh, you know, do we really have to go through this again? Do we
It
have
seems
to
like we have
learn
to
this lesson again?"
we always have to relearn, like, the past. It's like
I
stuff
know,
from like, they learn about the '30s, right?
I
You
know,
learn about, like, dictators.
I know,
You learn about, like, oligarchy and this kind of top-down approach in narcissism,
and
and then you see people practicing it, and the problem is, like, we have, like, our educational system doesn't actually value learning the history and sociology and some
yeah,
of the softer things. It's saying only learn this, only learn that. Then you don't have a complete picture as a person to
no,
actually digest or discern when information is put in front of you. You can't make a good judgment because you don't know how to have critical thinking or push it, right? It's like, is that right? Am I just going to accept it? I think artists, we tend not to do that. We tend to, like, okay,
we're
I have a perspective and it's not really the popular perspective. Like you were told like, oh, you don't do that. You don't illustrate your own book. You don't do
Yeah,
this type of book for the young adult audience. Is like, why not? Why can't I
exactly.
do
Why not?
that?
One of the things I was really grateful for was when I was young, from about grade 3 to 8th grade, we lived in Germany, in Heidelberg. And uh, my parents took us to a concentration camp museum when I
Mm,
was 10. And I mean, it was really traumatizing.
that's heavy.
It was horrible. And yet it also set me on this path of questioning, well, if someone like Hitler was once an innocent baby, and I've seen photos of Hitler as a baby, he was an innocent baby.
Like anybody,
He
yeah.
was beautiful, there was no problem with him as a baby. What happened? How did he go from there to becoming someone who could kill millions and millions and millions of people? So how does someone like that happen versus someone like Nelson Mandela, who
Yeah,
was also a beautiful baby, and he grows up, he's put into prison for what, like
20 years or more.
28 years, or
Almost
like,
30.
if anybody was, had a reason to be bitter, it was
Angry, yeah.
him. And yet
Resentment.
he comes out of prison and he's like, we are going to unite this country. We are going to be better than what we have ever been before. And he draws all of the people around him. So you have Hitler, and then you have someone like Nelson Mandela, and they both start out as babies. And so this started my mind thinking, like, how
How does that happen?
what happens? And that's what the first edition of this book was all about,
Takes
because
back
the
time, yeah.
leader of the rat colony is this Stalin like beloved chairman. And and how do you get a whole colony of people or rats following something where it's obviously leading you down the wrong path? And so, I think that teaching, going back to education, I don't care if someone knows their multiplication tables. If they don't know how to think,
Yeah, thinking is critical.
they have to not just know facts or history or whatever. They have to be taught how to think about them, how to analyze, how to think for themselves, how to have critical thinking, and
Yeah,
how to have character.
I think
You
it's
know,
important to understand, like, we teach kids today and they have to do, like, an SAT kinda kinda answer, like, the yes is no, versus, like, a Socratic method where you have to actually go in and show your professor, show your teacher
yeah,
that you actually understood what you were taught, right? So you can
yeah,
apply it and use critical thinking. I went to Bowdoin and we had blue books or we had oral exams and we had to basically show that we understood what we were taught that semester
yeah.
in our own words, piece it together.
And that's
And
hard.
it's harder,
It's
right? It's
hard.
to do it, but it's very, it
Yeah,
helps me to even to this day
yeah,
that the way I was taught, and it's a certain, you shouldn't have to go and spend so much money to be taught that way.
yeah,
To me, more people should be taught in a way that teaches a holistic thinking and critical thinking, Socratic method, things like that, so that you can actually have people in society that can participate as a civics of
yeah,
actually being a member of society and understanding what it means for your fellow person.
yeah,
The actions you take have consequences, the
yeah,
non-actions have consequences. And like if you make a decision, there's a consequence to that decision, and you got to look at what can happen. And some people just don't. It's like, well, what's the price of eggs? It's like, well, okay, what's the price of eggs? It's like, well, what happens to this other person
yeah.
for the price of eggs? Like,
Well, that's the thing, like, when you start really thinking about something, like, I don't shop at the real discount stores, because if the price of producing something is still the price that it costs to produce something, then that cheap price is being paid by a worker
Yeah.
somewhere or by an animal, who are factory farmed or whatever. Like, where's the cheap
Yeah,
price
the
coming from?
pasture-raised egg versus the egg from the factory farm. So
Right.
you gotta pay
So,
more money for the pasture-raised egg or the pasture-raised chicken,
right,
and people have to kinda piece it together, but, people don't piece things together. They don't think about the consequences of your action. It's like,
yeah,
if you have a homeless group of people and they get sick, well, illnesses don't stay in the homeless camp.
right.
Right? So, that you have to think about your fellow man. It's like, not you shouldn't just worry about if you get sick, but that you don't piece it together. It's like people don't live outside each other. Like everybody's interconnected, even from this part of the planet to the next part of the planet. You
Well,
put
quantum physics has shown that this division is actually an illusion. We are all part of this one fabric of life. And the division that we see, our individual bodies or whatever, is congealed energy kind of swirling around on itself. And to me, I've been involved with energy medicine. I'm becoming certified as a practitioner, and I'm fascinated with the intersection between quantum physics and energy medicine, because you can work with someone, doing energy healing, and they can be on the other side of the planet. It
yeah,
just doesn't matter because everything is like, you
it's
know,
all electricity, it's all
yeah,
energy. It's all
yeah,
frequency. Being a musician, we pick up frequencies and we can see that if I do certain frequencies and certain patterns or rhythms, I can actually in real time affect a crowd. In real
cool.
time for using certain frequencies, I can get harmonious behavior. Or like if you think about a punk aesthetic, I could get
Uh-huh.
people like body slamming in a punk kind of, you know, mosh pit.
That's
Depending on
really
what
interesting.
frequency I do, they can get if you do like I can do all types of music, and I've done punk, and I've done orchestral, and you can see like it's like this punk thing. We get they're in this big pit and they're bouncing around versus people who lighting up candles and waving. Like you can
Yeah,
change people's behavior by the frequencies, and your voice does the same thing.
that's really interesting.
If you think about that, it's like your voice is an instrument. So
Yeah,
people like wonder why these sometimes these orators can influence crowds, can
right.
influence people because you can, listen to what Hitler was saying or Stalin.
Yeah,
And
and
then listen
they've
to
got this
Kennedy or
hypnotic.
Dr. King,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
you see the different behavior from the people hearing it,
yeah.
you know?
Well, I mean, like you just talking about Dr. King, like just thinking about his "I Have a Dream" speech, and I've literally got chills because he, it was as you say that he just had this way
It's
of,
musical.
oh, just
If you listen to it, it's very musical. Even
gorgeous. Yeah,
Kennedy's speeches, like, you can actually look at it, and
yeah,
it's very much like music. It's
yeah.
poetry, and it affects people in the same way that a song can, and orators can figure that out, and they figure out ways to actually present, and then as you do public speaking, you start to realize how much of an art it is, and science too. It's kinda intertwined.
And it's interesting how, like you're right. Like there are people who are charismatic, like and I hate to use that word around Hitler in case it sounds like I'm saying yay for no, I'm not. I'm saying he
Yeah,
was he
right.
was one of the anyway, he was one of the people who, if he had, it's hard to put into words how much I just can't even fathom what he did. But he was able to harness his voice, his dark, you know,
Intentions, yeah.
malignant charisma to draw people in to do malignant, horrid things. And at the very same time, you have someone like Dr. King who was so charismatic, but because it was coming in through his pure heart, it went out like a beacon, and it made everybody who heard him better.
Yeah,
What
I
are
think it
people?
has the power, that's the frequency kind of power, like, you
Yeah,
can law of attraction.
yeah,
You pull the positivity.
yeah,
If you put out positivity, you bring positivity. You like so you put out negativity and
and that's
distortion,
yeah,
then you get distortion. You get that kind of Idi Amin, Saddam
yeah,
Hussein. You get these people that like, why do people follow that? Because
yeah,
you pick up a frequency and people kind of get tied in.
yeah,
You can see it with, cults. You get a Jim Jones, and you listen to
yeah,
I've watched documentaries on Jim Jones's voice, and, and Heaven's Gate, and you check out different charismatic leaders over time, and you look at their patterns, you look at the behavior, it's very mesmerizing.
and
It
that's
pulls
why
these
the
pulls people in.
education that's why education is so critical, the critical thinking, because just because someone's charismatic doesn't mean we just, fall into line and follow them. We have to be sitting there going, okay, that person is charismatic, and what are they selling?
What
What
are
are
they
they
saying?
telling me? You
Does it
know,
make sense? I think
yeah,
sometimes there's like a disbelief. I think humans are always looking for faith, and
yeah,
so they'll get rid of the logic, and
right,
because it's like if you don't feel good about yourself
right.
and you're seeking validation from outside, you kinda get
You
victim to that, because
you
then
get lost.
you
You're
get
lost.
lost in it because 'cause you're looking for somebody else to lead you,
Right.
and you're not willing to lead yourself.
That's
Um,
yeah.
and I think
Oh,
that's where people fall down, is that they're willing to give up the reins of their individuality for some sense of, safety.
they're willing to not seek truth for themselves and just have some this authority figure just say, "Oh, just follow me and I will keep you safe," you
And
know?
it absolves you of responsibility, because
Yeah,
people, like, so don't always wanna take responsibility, so then it's like, we used to I was a sociology major, and we'd look at the sociology of a riot. What makes, like, somebody throws a rock, somebody throws a brick, and then that gives the permission structure for other people to throw the rock and the
yeah,
brick, to take up the bat and hit somebody. You ask them before they got there, were they gonna do that? No, they never even thought they were gonna do that. But once
yeah,
they get caught in the crowd dynamic, then suddenly the permission structure and then the rules in society start breaking, right? And suddenly, like, oh, they're doing it, so I can do it.
the
And
mob mentality.
mob mentality
Yeah,
kicks in, and
yeah,
humans have a tendency to fall into that.
yeah, it's pretty yeah, like, I'm very careful before if I go out to demonstrate for something, like, here they were trying to pave over this protected green area, so, yeah, we went out with signs, and we're out at the side of the road going, "Hey, vote against such and such," and but I would not join a protest that isn't very carefully controlled, because as soon as you start getting some people in there who are, we're going to mix things up, we're going to break things,
Yeah.
all of a
Mm.
sudden you are in a beast that is
Yeah, it
running,
gets out of control. It gets its own dynamic, it's its own
yeah,
personality of the crowd.
yeah,
Like the crowd personality, crowd but dynamics, and you can get into certain,
yeah,
wrong behaviors or bad behaviors, or it goes off the rails. And it's like, I just think in today's, like, it's really about, like, can you discern?
yeah,
Are people discerning for you? And
yes,
and I think that's, I think if when people look at art and they look at creative people like yourself and they get drawn into your work, then they feel like there's something worth, like I said, getting up in the morning when you see something really cool. Like if
yeah,
you look at one of your books, you read your stories, you see the dynamicism, the connection, the storytelling. It like makes you happy, when you read something, or it makes you sad, or whatever it makes you feel,
makes you
but it
feel
makes
a
you feel
connection.
something. But
Sorry. Makes you feel a connection.
yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
important to not feel disconnected or feel like not. People get numb,
yeah.
and I think art, I think, helps you not be as numb to the world and be more understanding of the world.
And I think it also makes you realize you're not alone. When because people walking out in the world, we all have on our social mask. You don't see what's going on underneath. But when you read a book where the mask is off and you are inside the mind of this character and the character is going through something like what you're going through, it makes you realize you're not alone, that you can keep going. You can and maybe go on to write your own books. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about art is like it inspires you. You know, I don't know how many writers like were inspired because they read,
Yeah.
they read they Tolkien, and
Yeah,
then they're like,
or
it's like, oh,
Watership Down, or
Martian Down, or they
yeah,
read like Charlotte's Web, or
yeah,
they read, like Swiftly Tilting Planet, or something like that. It's like people get. I grew up, getting into Citizen Kane,
yeah,
listening to Miles Davis, made me want to, get into arts, get into
yeah,
be a musician because like they're like, wow, he's like, look what he can do. Look
I
at this
know,
person can do. Like look at Joni Mitchell, and
yeah,
listen to what she's doing with her words. And like
yeah,
I get drawn into her storytelling. I'm like, wow. It's like I just really I love stories. So whether you're a poet, a playwright, an illustrator, an actor, like people who tell stories to me, that's why I like to do this show. But
yeah.
we always go longer than we ever yeah, anticipate. But we hit our hour mark. But this has been a great conversation. I do appreciate that you have been here today, and you do have your website. What I wanted to mention, like, so people go to your website below. What will they find there? Is how they can get to your books, or
Yeah, I'll have my books are there, and also I have presentations, like a list of presentations I can do. But there's also podcasts, there's articles I've written, and and of course the social media links and stuff. But yeah, I would love to hear from people.
well, thank you. I would do want to remind people that it's fully clickable. The link below, and we were just live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll be on all the other podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by the end of today. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast.
I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much. What a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. You too.